The train lurched to a halt with a grinding screech that sent Coralie stumbling against the worn wooden seat. Through the frost-covered window, she could see nothing but white, an endless expanse of snow that seemed to swallow the world whole. Wyoming. The very name tasted foreign on her tongue, like the bitter coffee she'd forced down at the last station. She pulled the thin wool shawl tighter around her shoulders, though it did little against the cold that seeped through every crack in the passenger car. The letter in her reticule had grown soft from handling, its edges worn from the countless times she'd unfolded it to reassure herself this was real. A marriage contract, her salvation, or perhaps her damnation. She wasn't certain which anymore. The other passengers had long since stopped their curious glances, though she'd felt their judgment for miles. A woman traveling alone, dressed in a faded burgundy dress that had seen better days, clutching a single carpet bag. Mail-order bride, their eyes said, desperate, shameful. She'd learned to let their stares slide off her like rain on oiled canvas. Willow Creek, the conductor bellowed, his voice cutting through the murmur of conversation. Next up, Willow Creek. Cora's heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the end of the line, quite literally. She gathered her meager belongings. The carpet bag held everything she owned in the world, and made her way down the aisle on unsteady legs. The platform was little more than wooden planks laid over frozen mud, already gathering a fresh coat of snow. The wind hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and sending her skirts whipping around her legs. She scanned the handful of people waiting, looking for... What? She'd never seen Eli Morgan. Had no idea what kind of man would need to send for a bride through the mail. You, the Lee woman? The voice was gruff, belonging to a weathered man in his 50s with a week's worth of gray stubble. Not her husband, surely. He was watching her with the same mixture of curiosity and disdain she'd grown accustomed to. I'm Coralie. Yes, I'm looking for Mr. Eli Morgan. The man spat a stream of tobacco juice into the snow. He ain't here. Sent me to fetch you. Name's Jed. He didn't offer his hand, just jerked his head toward a wagon that had seen better decades. Best get moving. Storm's coming in. She climbed into the wagon bed. As there was no seat beside the driver, the wood was rough and cold through her dress, and she had to brace herself against the sides as Jed urged the horses into motion. The town, if it could be called that, disappeared behind them within minutes, swallowed by the swirling snow. The ride seemed endless. Her fingers went numb despite her gloves, and her teeth chattered so hard she feared they might crack. Jed offered no conversation, no comfort, just the occasional grunt as he navigated what she assumed was a road beneath the snow. The landscape was brutal in its emptiness. No trees, no landmarks, just white upon white upon white. When the ranch finally came into view, her heart sank. She'd harbored no illusions about marrying into luxury, but the collection of weather-beaten buildings looked barely habitable. The main house squatted low against the earth, as if trying to escape the wind. Smoke trickled from a stone chimney, the only sign of life. Jed pulled up near what appeared to be a barn and climbed down without a word. Cora waited, uncertain, until it became clear he wasn't going to help her. She managed to clamber down on her own, her frozen skirts making her clumsy. The front door of the house opened, and a man stepped onto the porch. Even from a distance, she could see he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30, 35 at most. Tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and clothes that spoke of hard work rather than prosperity. He didn't come forward, didn't smile, just stood there watching her approach like she was a problem he hadn't figured out how to solve. Mr. Morgan? Her voice came out smaller than she'd intended. You're late. His voice was as cold as the wind. Gray eyes, the color of the winter sky, traveled over her once, dismissively. Jed will show you where to put your things. He turned to go back inside, and she felt something flare in her chest. Anger, perhaps, or just the last gasps of her pride. Aren't you going to... we're to be married? I thought... Tomorrow, maybe, or next week. He paused in the doorway but didn't turn around. Depends on the weather, and whether you last that long." The door closed with a finality that made her flinch. Jed was already walking toward the barn, and she had no choice but to follow, dragging her carpet bag through the snow. Her eyes burned, but she wouldn't cry. Not yet. The barn was warmer than outside, though not by much. The smell of horses and hay was overwhelming after months of city air. Jed led her past the stalls to a small room at the back. A tack room, she realized, converted into crude living quarters. There was a narrow cot with a single blanket, a small pot-bellied stove that gave off more smoke than heat, and a wooden crate that served as a table. This is where I'm to stay." Jed shrugged. "Boss's orders. There's a pump out back for water. Privy's behind the main house. I'll bring some wood for the stove." He paused at the door. "Word of advice. Morgan's not a bad man, just a hard one. His wife." He shook his head and left the sentence unfinished. Alone, Cora sank onto the cot. The blanket was rough wool, horse blanket most likely, and smelled of animals and old sweat. Through the thin walls, she could hear the horses moving in their stalls, their occasional snorts and stamps. At least she wouldn't be entirely alone. She unpacked slowly, her few possessions looking even more pathetic in this setting. A change of underclothes, a nightgown that had been her mother's, a small Bible, a photograph of her parents, long dead, the contract, of course, and tucked at the very bottom, wrapped in tissue paper, a small silver mirror that had been her grandmother's, the only thing of value she owned. Night fell early and hard. The temperature plummeted further, and the little stove couldn't keep pace. She piled on every piece of clothing she owned and still shivered beneath the blanket. Through the cracks in the walls, she could see the lights from the main house, warm and golden and impossibly far away. The tears came then, hot and bitter. She pressed her face into the musty pillow to muffle her sobs. But in the quiet of the barn, every sound seemed amplified. What had she done? Trading one shame for another, one prison for another, at least in Boston. She'd had a roof over her head that didn't leak wind. "If this is what I deserve," she whispered into the darkness, her voice breaking. "Then I've been living right all along." The words hung in the air like frozen breath. She didn't know that in the main house. Eli Morgan stood at his bedroom window, looking out at the barn. He'd heard the wagon arrive, had watched from behind the curtain as she'd struggled down on her own, had seen the way her shoulders straightened when he'd dismissed her. Another mail-order bride, his sister-in-law's doing. No doubt, Martha meant well, but she didn't understand. He'd buried one wife in the frozen ground of this godforsaken place. He couldn't do it again. Better to keep this one at arm's length. Better to let her realize her mistake and leave come spring. But her whispered words carried on the wind, slipping through the cracks in his walls just as the cold slipped through hers. They lodged somewhere deep, in a place he'd thought frozen solid. He turned away from the window, jaw clenched, in the barn. Cora had no idea she'd been heard. She lay in the narrow cot, listening to the wind howl and the wolves sing their lonely songs in the distance. The contract crinkled against her chest where she'd tucked it inside her bodice. Tomorrow, he'd said, or next week, or never. More likely, the town would talk. She knew. They probably already were. The rancher who kept his bride in the barn. The woman so worthless she didn't even merit a place by the fire. But she'd endured worse whispers. Hadn't she? At least here. The shame was hers alone to bear, as sleep finally claimed her. She didn't see the shadow that paused outside the barn door. Didn't hear the quiet placement of an extra armload of wood beside her door. Didn't know that Eli Morgan stood in the cold for a long moment, fighting with himself, before trudging back to his empty house. The first night in Wyoming stretched long and bitter, filled with the sounds of horses and wind and two hearts beating in separate darknesses, neither knowing that something had already begun to shift in the frozen space between them. Cora woke before dawn, her breath visible in the frigid air. The stove had died during the night, and frost covered the inside walls of her makeshift room. Her fingers were so stiff she could barely manage the buttons on her dress, and her boots were frozen solid. She'd slept in them, afraid her feet would freeze otherwise. The pump behind the barn was frozen too. She had to break the ice with a rock before she could draw water, and even then it came reluctantly, burning her hands with its cold. She washed as best she could, teeth chattering, then made her way to the main house's back door. Surely he wouldn't expect her to simply wait in the barn all day. The kitchen was empty but blessedly warm. A fire crackled in the large cook stove, and coffee simmered in a blue enamel pot. She hesitated, unsure if she was allowed to help herself, when Eli appeared in the doorway. "You're up?" He seemed surprised, though whether pleasantly or not, she couldn't tell. He wore the same work clothes as yesterday, though these looked cleaner. "Coffee's there, breakfast fixings in the pantry." She waited for more. Instructions, perhaps, or at least an indication of what was expected of her. When nothing came, she ventured. "Would you like me to cook something?" "I already ate." He pulled on a heavy coat and wrapped a scarf around his neck. "There's work needs doing. You know anything about chickens?" "Some." Her aunt had kept a small flock in Boston. "Coops behind the barn. They need feeding and watering. Eggs collected. After that, there's mending needs doing. Jed'll show you where things are." He paused at the door. "And the milk cow needs tending twice a day. Can you manage that?" "Yes." She kept her voice steady, though inside she bristled. She'd come here to be a wife, not a hired hand. But arguing seemed pointless. At least he was acknowledging her existence. The day passed in a blur of unfamiliar tasks. The chicken coop was a disaster, clearly neglected for some time. The hens pecked at her viciously as she tried to collect eggs, and one rooster seemed determined to attack every time her back was turned. The milk cow, a Jersey named Bessie, was more cooperative but kicked over the bucket twice before Cora got the hang of the rhythm. Jed appeared periodically to point her toward new tasks. The mending pile was enormous. Shirts with ripped seams, socks with holes bigger than her fist, canvas tarps that looked more patch than original fabric. She set up in the barn's main area, where at least the body heat from the horses provided some warmth, and worked until her fingers cramped. At midday, she ventured back to the house to find something to eat. Eli was nowhere to be seen, but she could hear hammering from one of the outbuildings. She made do with bread and the last of the morning's coffee, eating standing up by the stove. The afternoon brought new challenges. Wood needed splitting, a task she'd never attempted. After nearly taking off her own foot with the axe, she settled for gathering kindling instead. The horses' stalls needed mucking, a job that left her dress filthy and her back screaming. By the time darkness fell, she could barely stand. She'd seen Eli only in glimpses throughout the day, a figure on horseback checking fence lines, a shadow moving between buildings. He came in for supper just as she was finishing the last of the dishes she'd found piled by the sink. "You cooked." Again, that note of surprise. "Stew." She gestured to the pot on the stove. "It's nothing fancy. Just vegetables and some salt pork she'd found in the pantry. But at least it was hot and filling." He ladled himself a bowl and sat at the scarred wooden table, eating in silence. She served herself and remained standing, unsure if she was welcome to sit. The quiet stretched between them, broken only by the pop of the fire and the wind rattling the windows. "Sit," he said finally, not looking up from his bowl. No need to stand there like a servant. She took the chair across from him, trying not to show how grateful she was to be off her feet. They ate without speaking, the silence growing heavier with each passing minute. She found herself studying him covertly, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the weathered lines around his eyes, hands scarred from years of hard work. "The barn's cold," she said finally, unable to bear the quiet any longer. "It's winter. I'm not complaining, just observing." His eyes flicked up to hers, and she thought she saw something shift in their gray depths. "There's extra blankets in the storage room. Help yourself." It wasn't much, but it was something. She cleared the dishes while he pulled out a pipe and tobacco. settling into what was clearly an evening routine. As she washed up, she hummed softly, an old hymn her mother used to sing. She didn't realize he was listening until the humming stopped and the kitchen felt too quiet again. That night was marginally better. The extra blankets helped, though they smelled of mothballs and dust. She'd also discovered that if she heated rocks on the stove and wrapped them in cloth, they held warmth for a few hours. It was an old trick her grandmother had taught her during lean times. The next days fell into a pattern. Up before dawn, tend the animals, cook, clean, mend, haul water, gather wood. Her hands, already rough from work, cracked and bled in the dry cold. Her dresses, unsuitable for ranch work, grew more tattered by the day. But she didn't complain. Pride, perhaps, or just stubbornness. She wouldn't give him the satisfaction of breaking. On the fourth day, she found a newborn calf in the far pasture, half frozen and barely breathing. Its mother stood nearby, lowing mournfully. Without thinking, Cora stripped off her shawl and wrapped the calf, then somehow managed to carry it back to the barn. She spent hours warming it by the stove, rubbing its limbs to get the blood flowing, dribbling warm milk into its mouth. Eli found her there near sunset, the calf's head in her lap as she coaxed it to drink from a bottle. "That's the Henderson's calf," he said. "Must have wandered through a break in the fence. He was dying." She didn't look up, focused on the tiny creature that was finally showing signs of life. "I couldn't just leave him." He watched for a long moment, then disappeared. When he returned, he carried a better blanket and a lamp. Might be a long night, no sense doing it in the dark. He stayed for a while, showing her how to position the calf, how to stimulate its breathing. His hands were gentle with the animal, patient. It was the most she'd seen of him since her arrival. "You've done this before," he observed, watching her technique with the bottle. "My aunt kept goats. Sometimes the kids needed help." She smiled slightly at the memory. "She said I had a knack for it, saving things that others gave up on." Something flickered across his face, there and gone too quickly to read. He stood abruptly. "I'll let Henderson know we've got his calf. He'll want to collect it in the morning." But when morning came, the calf was on its feet, wobbling but determined. Eli appeared with a neighboring rancher, a jovial man who pumped Cora's hand enthusiastically. "Mrs. Morgan, Eli said you saved our little bull here. Can't thank you enough. Would have been a real loss." Mrs. Morgan. The title sat strangely on her, considering she still slept in the barn and had yet to exchange more than a handful of sentences with her supposed husband. But she smiled and accepted his thanks, helped load the calf onto his wagon. "That was a kindness," Eli said after Henderson left. They stood in the barn doorway, watching the wagon disappear into the distance. Not many would have bothered. It was just a calf. Still, he cleared his throat. "Thank you." It was the first genuine warmth she'd heard in his voice. She treasured it through the rest of that long, cold day. Through another supper eaten in silence. Through another night in her barn room that suddenly didn't feel quite as cold. The storm arrived the next week without warning. Cora woke to find snow piled against her door, the wind howling like a living thing. She couldn't see the house through the white wall of the blizzard. The temperature in the barn plummeted, and even the horses grew restless in their stalls. She just managed to get the stove going when the door burst open. Eli stood there, covered in snow, looking like some wild winter spirit. "And get your things," he shouted over the wind. "Now!" "What?" "The roof's starting to go. This whole side could come down. Get your things and get to the house." She grabbed her carpet bag, stuffed in whatever she could reach. He took it from her, then grabbed her arm, pulling her out into the storm. The wind nearly knocked her down, and she couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. If he hadn't been holding her, she would have been lost in seconds. They stumbled through the kitchen door, both gasping. Snow covered everything, already melting into puddles on the floor. He pushed her toward the stove. "Get warm. I need to check the livestock." "In this? If I don't, we'll lose them all." He was already heading back out. She spent the next hour pacing, watching the windows, though she could see nothing but white. When he finally returned, he was half frozen, barely able to speak through chattering teeth. She helped him out of his frozen coat, pushed him into a chair by the fire, brought coffee laced with whiskey she'd found in a cupboard. "Fool thing to do," she muttered, rubbing feeling back into his hands. "Getting yourself killed won't help anyone. Had to make sure." His eyes found hers. The barn roof went. "Your room. It's gone." She sat back on her heels, absorbing this. Her few possessions, her makeshift home, buried under timber and snow. "Well," she said finally, "I suppose that settles that?" He caught her hand as she started to rise. His fingers were still cold, but his grip was firm. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. You shouldn't have been out there in the first place." "No," she agreed quietly. "I shouldn't have." They stayed like that for a moment, her hand in his, the storm raging outside, something shifting in the space between them. Then he let go, looked away. "There's a room upstairs. Was going to be for. It's empty now. You can use it." She nodded, understanding what he couldn't say. His wife's room, the one that was supposed to be a nursery. "Thank you." That night, she lay in a real bed for the first time in over a week. The room was sparse but clean, with faded wallpaper and curtains that had once been blue. Through the wall, she could hear Eli moving about in his own room, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of a chair. The storm raged for 2 more days, trapping them together in the house. They developed a careful dance around each other, sharing meals, tending the fire, playing cards in the evening when the silence grew too heavy. She learned he liked his coffee black, that he read the Bible every night before bed, that he carved little figures from wood when his hands needed something to do. On the 3rd morning, she woke to silence and brilliant sunshine. The world outside was transformed, pristine white drifts sculptured by wind, icicles hanging like jewels from the eaves. Beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Eli was already outside, shoveling paths to the essential buildings. She watched from the window as he worked, steady and methodical. When he came in for breakfast, his cheeks were red with cold, but something in his expression had eased. "Thank you," he said, warming his hands around his coffee cup. "For the help during the storm, for," he gestured vaguely, "everything. It's what wives do," she said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something flicker in his eyes. Pain, maybe, or hope. "Is it?" "If given the chance." The words hung between them. A challenge and an offer. He set down his cup, opened his mouth to speak, then seemed to think better of it. But that night, when she headed upstairs, he called after her. "Cora?" She paused on the landing. "I'm glad you're here. I didn't think I would be, but I am." It wasn't a declaration of love, wasn't even a promise, but it was a beginning. The arrangement made no sense. Cora had a perfectly good bed now, a room with 4 walls and a door that closed properly. Yet each night, Eli would grab a blanket and head out to the barn, to sleep in what remained of the tack room on the other side. She'd watch from her window as his lantern bobbed through the darkness, confusion and hurt warring in her chest. "It ain't right," Jed muttered one morning, finding her collecting eggs. "Man sleeps in his own barn while his wife's in the house. People are talking. Let them talk." But the words stung. She'd thought they'd made progress during the storm, found some small understanding. Now it seemed they'd stepped backward into stranger territory than before. She tried to broach the subject over breakfast. "The barn must be terribly cold at night. I've slept in worse." He didn't look up from his plate. "But surely, leave it be, Cora." His voice carried a warning that made her bite her tongue. Days passed in this strange dance. They shared meals, worked side by side when needed, even managed occasional conversations about the weather or the livestock. But something fundamental remained broken between them, and she didn't know how to fix it. The breaking point came unexpectedly. She'd been sorting through a trunk in the attic, looking for extra blankets. When she found them, baby clothes, Tiny gowns hand-stitched with infinite care, little caps and booties wrapped in tissue paper, and underneath, a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and dark hair. My beloved Lily, written on the back in Eli's careful script. She was still holding the photograph when he found her, his face going white with fury. "What are you doing?" "I was looking for blankets. I didn't mean—" "Get out!" His voice was deadly quiet. "Get out of this room!" She fled, the photograph fluttering from her fingers. She heard his footsteps above her for hours that night, pacing like a caged animal. When morning came, he didn't appear for breakfast. Jed brought word that Eli had ridden out to check the far pastures and wouldn't be back until late. Cora spent the day in miserable contemplation. She'd known about Lily, of course. Hard to keep secrets in a town this small. Knew she'd died in childbirth, along with the baby. But seeing those tiny clothes, the evidence of hope and dreams destroyed, made it real in a way gossip couldn't. She was mending by lamplight when he finally returned. He stood in the doorway, looking haggard, older than his years. "I'm sorry," she said before he could speak. "I shouldn't have been going through your things." He sank into a chair, rubbing his face with both hands. "No, I overreacted. It's just—" "You don't have to explain. Maybe I do." He looked up at her, eyes haunted. "Maybe that's the problem. I never talk about it, about her." Cora set aside her sewing, waiting. The clock ticked loudly in the silence. "She was 18 when we married. I was 23. Thought I knew everything." A bitter smile twisted his lips. "Brought her out here. To this place. She was from St. Louis. Used to society. Proper houses. But she never complained. Said she'd make it a home." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "When she told me about the baby, I was so happy. We both were. Started making plans, picking names. She sewed those clothes you found, humming all the while." His voice cracked. Cora wanted to go to him, but sensed he needed the distance. "The doctor was in Cheyenne. 2 days' ride. I should have taken her there when her time got close. But she said she was fine. Said women had been having babies on the frontier since forever. The midwife." He pressed his forehead against the cold glass. "The midwife was drunk when we needed her. By the time I sobered her up, got her here, it was too late. The baby was turned wrong. And Lily, she bled. So much blood. Eli, I killed her." The words came out raw, torn from somewhere deep. "I brought her here, kept her here, and I killed her sure as if I'd pulled a trigger. That's not true." She was beside him now, not touching, just close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Women die in childbirth in cities too, with the finest doctors attending. It wasn't your fault. The whole town blamed me. Hell, I blamed myself. Still do." He turned to face her, and she saw tears on his cheeks. "That's why I sleep in the barn. Can't be in that room, our room, can't be. I can't do this again, Cora. I can't care for someone and watch them die." Understanding dawned like a cold sunrise. "So you keep me at arm's length, close enough to satisfy propriety, far enough that you won't feel it if something happens. It's better this way." "For whom?" She felt anger rising, clean and sharp. "Not for me. Certainly. And looking at you, not for you either. You're not protecting anyone. Eli, you're just prolonging the dying." He flinched as if she'd slapped him. "You don't understand, don't I?" Her voice rose. "You think you're the only one who's lost someone? Who's been broken?" She laughed, bitter and wild. "Let me tell you about loss, Eli Morgan. Let me tell you what sent me here." She'd never told anyone the full story, but it poured out now like water through a broken dam. The promising engagement to Richard Thornton, son of a prominent Boston banker. The gradual realization that his interest was more possession than affection. The night he'd forced himself on her after a party, drunk and entitled. The pregnancy that followed. When I told him, he laughed, said I was trying to trap him, that I was nothing but a fortune hunter. Her voice was steady now, clinical. He spread rumors that I'd been with half the men in Boston. My reputation was destroyed overnight, and then I lost the baby. 3 months along. The doctor said it was the stress, but I think maybe it was Mercy." Eli had gone very still, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "So yes, I understand loss. I understand shame. I understand being blamed for things beyond your control." She met his eyes squarely. "But I'm still here, still trying. Because what else is there? You can't live your whole life in a barn, Eli. And you can't keep me there either." The silence stretched between them, taut as a bowstring. Then, so quietly she almost missed it, he whispered, "I'm scared." "So am I." She reached out, touched his hand briefly. "But maybe that's okay. Maybe being scared together is better than being scared alone." He caught her hand before she could pull away, held it gently. His thumb traced the calluses that weeks of hard work had built. "I don't know how to do this." "Neither do I, but perhaps we could figure it out as we go." Something shifted in his expression, a wall beginning to crumble, but old habits died hard. And after a moment, he released her hand, stepped back. "It's late. You should rest." She nodded, disappointment a stone in her chest. But as she turned to go, he spoke again. "Cora, would you like to see the rest of the house tomorrow? There are rooms I've kept closed. Maybe it's time to air them out." It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning brought unexpected warmth, a Chinook wind that made the snow drip from the eaves. Eli was quiet at breakfast, but not withdrawn. When they'd finished, he led her upstairs to a door she'd never seen opened. "This was going to be the nursery," he said, turning the key with hands that shook slightly. The room was exactly as Lily must have left it, a cradle by the window, still bearing the quilt she'd made. A rocking chair with a half-finished sampler on the seat. Dust motes danced in the morning sun, giving everything a dreamlike quality. "She would have been a wonderful mother," Eli said softly. "Tell me about her." So he did. As they opened windows and let in fresh air, he told her about Lily's laugh, her terrible cooking, her way with animals, how she'd tried to plant roses in the hard Wyoming soil and cried when they died, how she'd made him dance with her in the kitchen when he was too tired to move. "She sounds lovely," Cora said when he finally fell silent. "She was." He touched the cradle gently, setting it rocking. "But she's gone, and you're here. Is that enough?" He looked at her then, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out." That night, he didn't go to the barn. He stayed in the kitchen after dinner, carving a piece of wood while she read aloud from one of the few books in the house. When it grew late, he banked the fire and bid her good night, heading to his own room. It wasn't the arrangement of a proper marriage, not yet, but he was in the house, under the same roof. It was progress. Over the following days, something fragile began to grow between them. He showed her Lily's garden plot, admitted he'd kept trying to grow her roses. She told him about her grandmother's mirror, the only valuable thing she owned, now lost in the barn collapse. He spent the next day digging through the rubble and somehow, miraculously, found it unbroken. "Thank you," she breathed, clutching the silver frame. "It's just a mirror." "No." She looked up at him, eyes bright. "It's hope. It's proof that broken things don't always stay broken." He touched her cheek then, so gently she might have imagined it. "Maybe you're right." But that night, when she heard him pacing his room, she knew the ghosts weren't so easily banished. Healing would take time. Trust would take longer. And love? Well, love would have to be patient. She whispered prayers into the darkness. For him. For herself. For the woman who'd died in this house and the child who'd never drawn breath. And somewhere between the praying and the crying, she whispered again those words that had started everything. "I'm not here to replace anyone. I'm here to live, if you'll let me." This time, she knew he heard her. His pacing stopped, and through the thin wall, she heard what might have been a sob, Or perhaps it was just the wind, crying for all the broken hearts trying to mend in the darkness of a Wyoming winter. Spring came slowly to Wyoming, fighting winter for every inch of ground. The snow retreated grudgingly, revealing the brown earth beneath, and the first brave shoots of grass pushed through the mud. With the thaw came a new rhythm to life on the ranch, and with it, a cautious warming between Eli and Cora. They'd developed a pattern of shared meals and evening conversations, though both were careful not to push too hard against the boundaries that remained. Eli had taken to helping with household tasks when his ranch work was done, and Cora had learned to read his moods in the set of his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. "Fence needs mending in the south pasture," he mentioned one morning over breakfast. "Ground's finally soft enough to dig new posts." "I could help," she offered. As she had taken to doing, he no longer automatically refused. "It's hard work. I've noticed everything here is hard work." She smiled to soften the words. "I'm getting used to it." They worked side by side through the morning, Eli digging post holes while she held the new posts steady. The sun was warm on their backs, and she found herself humming again, that same hymn from her first days here. This time, he hummed along, his deep voice harmonizing with hers. "You have a nice voice," she said, surprising them both. He flushed slightly. "Lily used to say that. We'd sing together sometimes, in church." He paused, then added quietly, "I haven't sung since she died. Maybe it's time to start again." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "Maybe it is." That afternoon, they were interrupted by riders approaching, 3 women from town, their faces set in expressions of determined charity. Cora recognized Mrs. Henderson, the rancher's wife whose calf she'd saved, but the other 2 were strangers. "Mrs. Morgan." "Mrs." Henderson called out cheerfully, though her companions looked less pleased to be there. "We thought it was high time we paid a social call." Cora glanced at Eli, who had gone rigid beside her. "That's very kind. Would you like to come in for tea?" The ladies followed her inside, their eyes taking in every detail of the simple kitchen. Cora served tea with hands that barely trembled, acutely aware of her patched dress and work-roughened hands. "We heard about your heroics with our calf," Mrs. Henderson said warmly. "My husband couldn't stop talking about it." "It was nothing," Cora murmured. "Nonsense. It shows real character." She shot a meaningful look at her companions. "The kind of character we value out here." One of the other women, introduced as Mrs. Davies, sniffed delicately. "Still, it must be quite an adjustment. From Boston to this, every place has its charms." Cora replied evenly. "Indeed, though I imagine you miss civilization. The barn must have been particularly trying." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Cora felt heat rise in her cheeks, but kept her voice steady. "We make do with what we have. I've learned that comfort is more about the people you're with than the roof over your head." Mrs. Henderson intervened smoothly. "Speaking of which, we're organizing a barn raising for the Millers next month. We'd love to have you both there." "A barn raising?" Cora looked to Eli, who had remained silent by the stove. "That sounds wonderful." "It's settled then." Mrs. Henderson rose, clearly eager to escape the growing tension. "And Cora, may I call you Cora? Please don't let anyone make you feel unwelcome. We've all had our struggles out here. Some of us just remember it better than others." After they left, Cora stood at the window, watching their wagon disappear. "They came to inspect me," she said quietly, "to see if the mail-order bride was worth their time." "Town gossips," Eli said roughly. "Pay them no mind. Is that what you did when they talked about you after Lily died?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No, I listened to every word. Let it eat at me until there was nothing left but guilt and anger." She turned to face him. "I won't do that. I won't let them make me feel ashamed for surviving." Something fierce flashed in his eyes. "Good. You're worth 10 of those harpies." It was the first time he'd defended her, and the words warmed her more than the spring sun. That evening, as she mended one of his shirts, Her fingers encountered something unexpected, a scar on the fabric that had been carefully patched. She was examining it when Eli reached over and touched the spot. "Bullet hole," he said quietly. "From my time in the territories, before I met Lily. Got caught between cavalry and a band of Cheyenne warriors. Lucky it went through clean." She looked up at him, seeing new shadows in his past. "You could have died." "Almost did. Spent 3 weeks in an army hospital, fevered and raving. When I came out of it, I decided I was done with violence. Bought this land, tried to build something peaceful." His smile was rueful. "Didn't quite work out that way." Without thinking, she reached out and touched the place where the scar would be on his chest. He went very still, but didn't pull away. Through the thin fabric of his shirt, she could feel his heart racing. "I'm glad you survived," she whispered. His hand covered hers, pressing it against his chest. "So am I. Now." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Then, as if by mutual agreement, they pulled apart. But something had shifted, another wall coming down. The next weeks brought more changes. Eli began teaching her to ride properly, not just to sit a horse, but to truly ride. They'd go out together in the evenings, checking fences and watching the sunset paint the mountains purple and gold. "You're a natural," he said one evening, watching her guide her mare through a narrow gate. "Better than some men I've known. I had a good teacher." She smiled at him, and he smiled back, a real smile that transformed his face. They were returning from one such ride when it happened. Her horse spooked at a snake, rearing suddenly. Cora kept her seat, but barely, and Eli was off his mount in an instant, catching her horse's bridle and speaking in low, soothing tones. "You all right?" He reached up to help her down, and she slid into his arms. "Yes, The words died as she realized how close they were. His hands spanned her waist. Her palms rested on his shoulders. She could see the gold flecks in his gray eyes, count the lines the sun had etched at their corners. "Cora," he breathed, and her name had never sounded like that before, like a prayer, like a plea. She didn't know who moved first. Perhaps they both did, but suddenly his lips were on hers, gentle and questioning at first, then deeper as she responded. He tasted of coffee and wood smoke, and his arms around her felt like coming home. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have. If you apologize for kissing me, Eli Morgan, I may have to shoot you with your own gun." He laughed, actually laughed, and the sound was rusty but real. "Yes, ma'am." They walked back to the house hand in hand, leading the horses. Neither spoke, but the silence was different now, warm with promise rather than weighted with grief. That night, after supper, instead of retreating to separate occupations, they sat together on the porch steps, watching the stars emerge. Cora leaned against his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, pulling her close. "I'm still scared," he admitted quietly. "Terrified, actually." "Of what?" "Of losing you, of not being enough, of repeating the past." She tilted her head to look at him. "The past is gone. Eli, we can't change it, but the future, that's ours to write." He kissed her again then, under the vast Wyoming sky, and for the first time since she'd arrived, Cora felt truly home. But even as they sat entwined, she felt him tense when a coyote howled in the distance, a reminder that the wilderness was never far away, and neither were the dangers that came with it. He held her tighter, as if he could protect her from everything just by refusing to let go. "Come inside," he said finally. "It's getting cold." They went in together, but at the foot of the stairs, habit reasserted itself. They paused, awkward again, the kiss hanging between them like a question neither quite knew how to answer. "Good night, Cora," he said softly, and she heard everything he couldn't yet say in those 2 words. "Good night, Eli." She climbed the stairs alone, but lighter than she'd been in months. Below, she heard him moving about, banking the fire, checking the locks, normal sounds of a normal evening. except everything had changed. In her room, she touched her lips, still feeling the pressure of his. Through the wall, she heard him preparing for bed, and for the first time, the sound didn't make her feel lonely. They were moving towards something, slow and careful as horses on uncertain ground, but moving nonetheless. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did out here. But tonight, she fell asleep with a smile on her face and hope blooming in her chest like Lily's roses that might finally grow come spring. The change between them was like spring itself, gradual but undeniable. They moved around each other with a new awareness, hands brushing as they passed dishes, eyes meeting across the supper table with unspoken understanding. The kisses came more frequently now. A quick press of lips before Eli rode out to check the herd. A lingering embrace in the evening shadows of the porch. Yet, still they maintained separate rooms, a last barrier neither seemed quite ready to cross. The barn raising at the Miller place proved to be a turning point. The whole community gathered, men working on the frame while women prepared food and tended children. Cora found herself welcomed into the circle of ranchers' wives, their earlier coolness thawing as they saw how naturally she fit into the rhythm of frontier life. "You've done wonders for him," Mrs. Henderson murmured, nodding toward where Eli worked alongside the other men. "Haven't seen him smile like that in years." Cora watched her husband, for that's how she'd come to think of him, despite the unconsummated nature of their union, as he hefted beams with easy strength. He caught her looking and winked, making her blush like a schoolgirl. "He's done the same for me," she replied softly. The day was long but satisfying, filled with the sounds of hammering and laughter. As evening approached and the barn frame stood complete against the sky, fiddles appeared and someone cleared a space for dancing. Cora was helping to pack away leftover food when Eli appeared at her elbow. "Dance with me?" She looked up, surprised. "I didn't know you danced." "I don't, but Lily taught me the steps, and I figure it's time I used them again." He held out his hand, and she took it without hesitation. They were clumsy at first, stepping on each other's feet and laughing. But then the music slowed, and they found their rhythm. Other couples swirled around them, but Cora was aware only of Eli's hand at her waist, the warmth of his body, the way he looked at her like she was something precious. "People are watching," she murmured. "Let them." He spun her gently, pulled her back close. "I want everyone to know you're my wife." The word sent a thrill through her, even as she wondered at the full meaning of it. But there, under the stars with the community around them and his arms holding her secure, she felt truly married for the first time. They drove home in companionable silence, the wagon wheels creaking over the rutted road. The moon was full, bathing everything in silver light. When they reached the ranch, Eli helped her down, his hands lingering on her waist. "Thank you for dancing with me," he said quietly. "Thank you for asking." She reached up, touched his cheek. "Eli, But whatever she might have said was lost as he kissed her, deeper than before, with a hunger that matched her own. They stumbled toward the house, unwilling to break apart, and barely made it through the door before he pressed her against the wall, his mouth trailing down her neck. "Cora!" he gasped, pulling back suddenly. I don't want to." "Shh." She placed a finger over his lips. "I know. It's all right." They stood there, breathing hard, desire and restraint warring in both their faces. Finally, Eli stepped back, running a hand through his hair. "You deserve better than a quick tumble. You deserve—" He struggled for words. "You deserve everything." She smiled, touched by his old-fashioned courtesy, even as her body ached for his touch. "Then give me everything. When you're ready." He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "Soon. I promise." The promise hung between them over the following days, charging every interaction with anticipation. They found excuses to touch, his hand on her back as she passed, her fingers brushing his as she handed him his coffee. The house itself seemed to pulse with unspoken desire. It was a warm evening in late May when everything changed. Cora had gone to bathe in the creek, thinking herself alone. The water was cold but refreshing after a day of hard work, and she floated on her back, watching the eagles circle overhead. She didn't hear Eli approach until a twig snapped. She spun, sinking neck-deep in the water, to find him frozen on the bank, his face a study in shock and want. "I'm sorry," he said, already turning away. "I didn't know you were. I came to water the horses. Eli." Something in her voice stopped him. Perhaps it was the weeks of careful dancing around each other, or the memory of his promise, or simply the need that had been building since that first kiss. "Don't go." He turned back slowly, his eyes carefully fixed on her face. "Cora, you said I deserved everything." She moved closer to the bank, water streaming from her hair. "I'm tired of waiting for someday." His control visibly wavered. "If we do this, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back." She held out her hand. "I want to go forward. With you." For a long moment, he stood perfectly still. Then, with a sound that might have been surrender or victory, he sat on the bank and pulled off his boots. His shirt followed, revealing the scar she'd only touched through fabric, a puckered mark over his heart that seemed symbolic of all his wounds. When he entered the water, she met him halfway. Their first touch was electric, skin to skin with nothing between them but honesty and need. He pulled her against him, and she could feel him trembling. "Are you sure?" he asked, even as his hands mapped the curve of her back. "I've never been more sure of anything." They came together there in the creek, with the sunset painting the sky crimson and the water cold around them. It was awkward and perfect, passionate and tender. Everything first times should be when two people have waited so long. Afterward, they lay on the bank wrapped in the blanket he'd brought for the horses, watching the stars emerge. Cora traced patterns on his chest, marveling at the freedom to touch him. "I love you," he said suddenly, the words seeming to surprise him. "I didn't think I could again, but I do. I love you, Cora." "I love you too." She propped herself up to look at him. "I think I have since that first night, when you left extra wood by my door." He looked startled. "You knew?" "I know you. Eli Morgan. Better than you think." They dressed reluctantly and walked back to the house hand in hand. At the foot of the stairs, they paused as they had so many nights before. But this time, when Eli spoke, it was to say, "Come with me." She followed him to his room, their room now, and they came together again in the bed he'd shared with Lily. If there were ghosts there, they were gentle ones, blessing rather than haunting. In the morning, Cora woke to find Eli watching her, his face soft with wonder. "No regrets?" she asked. "None. You. Only that we waited so long." He laughed and pulled her close. "We have time now. All the time in the world." They rose late, moving around each other with new ease. Over breakfast, they made plans. She would move her things to their room. They would clear out the spare room properly. Maybe think about the future it might hold. "I want you to know," Eli said carefully. "About children. If it happens, I'll be terrified. But I want you to know that I want them. With you." She reached across the table to take his hand. "If it happens, we'll face it together. The joy and the fear both." That afternoon, as she moved her few possessions into their shared room, she found him in what had been the nursery, taking down the cradle. "Not throwing it away," he said quickly. "Just storing it, until we need it." She helped him carry it to the attic, understanding the significance of the gesture. They were making space for their own future while honoring the past. That night, as they lay entwined in their bed, Cora whispered, "I'm not cold anymore, and I'm not alone," he whispered back, echoing their first true moment of connection. Outside, the wind sang through the grass, and the stars wheeled overhead in their ancient patterns. But inside the little ranch house, two hearts beat as one, having found their way through loss and loneliness to something that felt very much like forever. The mail-order bride who had slept in the barn now slept in her husband's arms, and if sometimes he held her too tightly, haunted by fears of loss, she only held him tighter in return. They had learned that love wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing to love despite it, because of it, through it, and in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and the coffee bubbled on the stove, they would face whatever came together, no longer stranger and stranger, but husband and wife, partner and partner, two souls who had whispered their way to love in the wild heart of Wyoming. The rider appeared on the horizon just after dawn, a dark silhouette against the pink-streaked sky. Cora saw him first from the kitchen window where she was kneading bread, and something in the purposeful way he rode made her stomach tighten with dread. "Eli," she called, her voice carefully neutral. "Someone's coming." He came in from the barn, took one look at her face, and grabbed the rifle from above the door. But as the rider drew closer, Cora's dread crystallized into cold recognition. The expensive cut of his coat, the way he sat his horse like he owned the very ground beneath it. She knew him before she could see his face. "It's Richard," she whispered. "Richard Thornton." Eli's hand tightened on the rifle. "The Boston man." She nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in her throat. In the weeks of happiness with Eli, she'd almost forgotten the shadow of her past, almost believed she could outrun it. Richard dismounted with practiced elegance, tying his horse to the fence post as if he had every right to be there. He looked exactly as she remembered, handsome in that polished Eastern way, with pale eyes that had once made her think of winter mornings but now reminded her of ice over deep water. "Cora," he said, removing his hat with a mockery of courtesy. "My dear, you've been difficult to find. Mr. Thornton." Her voice was steady, though her hands weren't. "You're a long way from Boston." "Indeed, but then, some things are worth the journey." His gaze traveled over her, taking in the simple calico dress, the work-roughened hands, the flower in her hair. His lip curled slightly. "You've certainly adapted to frontier life." Eli stepped onto the porch, the rifle casual in his hands but ready. "State your business, Mr." Richard's eyes flicked to him dismissively. "Ah, you must be the husband. Morgan, isn't it? I've heard about you in town. The widower who bought himself a bride." He smiled, showing too many teeth. "How practical. I said state your business. My business is with Cora. Or should I say, with what's mine?" Richard reached into his coat, and Eli raised the rifle slightly. But what emerged was just a packet of papers. "You see, Mr. Morgan, your wife and I have some unfinished matters." "There's nothing unfinished between us," Cora said firmly. "What we had is over. Has been over." "Has it?" Richard's voice took on a harder edge. "Because I seem to recall certain promises made. Certain compromises of virtue that create obligations." Cora felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Eli had gone very still. "Whatever happened in Boston?" Eli began. "Oh, she hasn't told you?" Richard's laugh was ugly. "How delightful. Well, let me enlighten you. Mr. Morgan, your blushing bride was my mistress. Quite enthusiastic about it, too, until she got careless and found herself in a delicate condition." "That's a lie." The words burst from Cora before she could stop them. "You forced yourself on me. You—" "Did I? That's not how your family saw it, or mine, or anyone in society. Really." He unfolded one of the papers. "In fact, I have here a signed statement from your aunt confirming that you pursued me relentlessly, that you were seen entering my rooms willingly on multiple occasions, because you threatened to ruin my cousin's prospects if I didn't," Richard continued as if she hadn't spoken. "The point is, my dear, you left quite a mess behind. My reputation suffered considerably. My engagement to Miss Pemberton was broken off. My family's business dealings were affected." His smile grew colder. "I've come to collect compensation." "Compensation?" Eli's voice was dangerously quiet. "Oh, yes. You see, I've invested considerable resources in tracking down my runaway mistress. Time, money, the hired investigators. It adds up." He named a sum that made Cora gasp. "I'll take it in cash, cattle, or land deed. Your choice. Get off my property." Eli's rifle was definitely raised now. "Certainly, but I'll be back. With the sheriff, if necessary. Richard's eyes found Cora again. You see, there's also the small matter of theft. That silver mirror you treasure so much? It was my grandmother's, given to Cora as a gift. A gift I've now decided to reclaim, along with its value. That mirror was my grandmother's, Cora protested. Prove it. His smile was triumphant. I have witnesses who'll swear they saw it in my family's possession, just as I have witnesses to all sorts of things about you. My dear, amazing what people will remember when properly motivated. He mounted his horse with the same easy grace, looking down at them like a king surveying peasants. I'll give you 3 days to consider my offer. After that, things become unpleasant. I'm staying at the hotel in town, should you wish to discuss terms. He touched his hat mockingly and rode away, leaving silence in his wake. Cora's knees gave out, and she sank onto the porch steps. Eli set down the rifle and sat beside her, not touching, a careful distance between them. How much of what he said was true? His voice was neutral, careful. He forced himself on me. The words came out raw. At a party, after he'd gotten me alone, I'd been trying to avoid him for weeks, but he threatened to spread rumors about my cousins, to ruin their chances at good marriages. So I went when he summoned me, tried to reason with him. He wouldn't listen. She felt Eli's hand cover hers, warm and steady. When I discovered I was with child, I went to him. I don't know what I thought, that he'd do the right thing. Maybe. He laughed, said I was trying to trap him. The story he spread was that I'd seduced him, that I was a fortune hunter who'd gotten desperate when he rejected me. She laughed bitterly. Fortune hunter? As if my family had any fortune to hunt for. What happened to the child? Lost it, 3 months along. The doctor said it was the strain. But I think my body knew what my mind couldn't accept, that bringing a child into that situation would have been cruel. Eli's arm came around her, pulling her against his side. I'm sorry, for all of it. The mirror really was my grandmother's. She whispered. It's the only thing I had of hers, of any of them. I know. He pressed a kiss to her temple. We'll figure this out. How? We don't have that kind of money. The ranch barely breaks even as it is. Panic rose in her throat. He'll take everything, or worse. He won't. Eli's voice was firm. I won't let him. You can't fight the whole world. Eli, he has connections, influence. He can make people say whatever he wants them to say. Maybe in Boston, but this is Wyoming. He stood, pulling her up with him. Come on, we're going to town. What? Why? To talk to some folks, and to send some telegrams of our own. They hitched up the wagon in tense silence as they drove toward town. Cora huddled against Eli's side, drawing comfort from his solid presence. But she could feel the tension in him, the controlled anger in the way he held the reins. You believe me? She asked quietly. About what really happened? He glanced down at her, surprise in his eyes. Of course I believe you, Cora. I've known you these months. I know who you are. That man. He shook his head. That man is a snake in a fancy coat. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by fresh fear. But what if others believe him? What if... Then we'll deal with it, together. He transferred the reins to one hand so he could take hers with the other. You're my wife. That means your battles are my battles. For better or worse. Remember? They spent the day in town. Eli talking to people while Cora waited in the wagon, too ashamed to face the curious stares. She saw him enter the sheriff's office, the telegraph office, even the church, when he finally returned. His face was grim but determined. Sheriff knows Thornton's type, he reported. Says he's been asking questions since he arrived, throwing money around, but folks here don't take kindly to outsiders making threats. What about the telegrams? Sent one to a lawyer I knew in Cheyenne, another to the Pinkerton office in Denver. At her surprised look, he shrugged. If he can hire investigators, so can we. See what we can find out about Mr. Richard Thornton's business dealings. Men like that always have secrets. That night, They lay awake, holding each other in the darkness. Cora could feel the tension in Eli's body, the way he kept pulling her closer as if afraid she'd disappear. "I won't let him take you," he murmured against her hair. "Not back to Boston. Not anywhere. I'm not going anywhere." She tilted her head to kiss him, trying to pour all her love and gratitude into the touch. "This is my home. You're my home." But even as they found comfort in each other's arms, she could hear Richard's words echoing. Things become unpleasant. She'd seen what he was capable of, the casual cruelty he wielded like a weapon, and now he'd brought that cruelty to the one place she'd thought herself safe. 3 days. They had 3 days to find a miracle, or everything they'd built together would come crashing down. In the darkness, Cora prayed, to her grandmother, to Lily, to any power that might be listening. She'd found love against all odds in this harsh, beautiful place. She couldn't lose it now. Not to the past that had followed her across a continent, not to a man who saw her as property to be reclaimed. Not when she'd finally learned what it meant to truly belong somewhere, to someone. Eli's arms tightened around her, and she knew his thoughts paralleled hers. They'd both lost too much already. This time, they would fight, together. The storm struck on the second night, as if the very heavens reflected the turmoil below. Cora woke to howling wind and the sharp crack of thunder, but it was Eli's absence that made her bolt upright. His side of the bed was cold. She found him at the kitchen table, the lamp burning low, surrounded by papers, ledgers, bank documents, the deed to the ranch. His face was haggard in the flickering light. "Eli?" He looked up, tried to smile. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd see if there was any way." He gestured helplessly at the papers. "But there isn't. Even if we sold every head of cattle, mortgaged the land to the hilt, we couldn't raise half what he's demanding." Lightning flashed, illuminating his face for an instant. The desperation there made her heart clench. She went to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders from behind. "We'll find another way." "What way?" His voice cracked. "I can't lose you. Cora, not now. Not when I just found you." She came around to face him, kneeling beside his chair. "You won't lose me, even if we have to run." "No." His hands cupped her face. "You've run enough. This is your home. Our home. We stand and fight." Thunder crashed overhead, and suddenly the kitchen door burst open. Jed stood there, water streaming from his coat, face grave. "Boss, you better come quick. That Eastern fellow, he's at the saloon, buying drinks and running his mouth. Sheriff's there, but the crowd's getting ugly." Eli was already reaching for his gun belt. "Stay here," he told Cora. "Like hell." She grabbed her shawl. "We face this together, remember? The ride to town was treacherous, rain turning the road to mud, lightning providing stark snapshots of the landscape. By the time they reached the saloon, a crowd had gathered despite the storm. Through the windows, Cora could see Richard holding court, his city polish incongruous among the rough-dressed ranchers and miners. "Telling you, gentlemen, it's a simple matter of property rights." Richard's cultured voice carried over the rain. "The woman stole from me, betrayed my trust. Any man here would seek justice. Your version of justice." Someone called out. Cora recognized Tom Miller, whose barn they'd helped raise. "Way, we heard it. You're the one did the betraying." Richard's laugh was cold. "And you heard this from whom? The woman herself? Hardly an unbiased source." Eli pushed through the crowd, Cora close behind. The saloon fell silent as they entered, all eyes turning to them. "Morgan," Richard raised his glass mockingly. "Come to negotiate, or perhaps your wife has come to her senses?" "I've come to tell you to leave." Eli's voice was steady as granite. "Tonight. Don't come back." "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Richard gestured to the sheriff, who watched grimly from the corner. "I think not. I've done nothing illegal, unlike your wife." "About that," a new voice spoke from the doorway. A tall man in a travel-stained suit stepped inside, shaking rain from his hat. "Mr. Thornton, I presume? My name's Jacob Steinberg, attorney at law. I have some questions about your business practices in Boston." Richard's face went pale. "I don't know you." "No, But you know my clients, the Pemberton family, for instance, very interested to learn where certain investment funds went, and the Caldwell shipping concern. They have questions about those warehouse fires." Steinberg smiled thinly. "Amazing what a good investigator can uncover in just 2 days." "You can't prove anything," Richard snarled. "Perhaps not, but I can make things unpleasant." Steinberg used Richard's own words with deliberate irony. "Investigations, audits, questions in all the right social circles. Your family's reputation might suffer considerably." The crowd murmured, sensing the shift in power. Richard's mask of civility cracked, revealing the ugly truth beneath. "You think you've won?" He turned on Cora, eyes blazing. "You worthless." He never finished. Eli's fist connected with his jaw, sending him sprawling. Richard came up spitting blood, reaching for something in his coat, but before he could draw whatever weapon he carried, the distinctive click of multiple hammers being cocked filled the room. Every man in the saloon had drawn on him. Cowboys, ranchers, even the bartender, all stood with guns trained on the eastern interloper. "Thing about Wyoming, mister," Sheriff Conway said mildly, "is we take care of our own and Mrs. Morgan is one of ours now." Richard looked around wildly, finally understanding that his money and connections meant nothing here. These people had seen Cora work alongside them, had watched her save calves and tend sick neighbors. She'd earned their respect with sweat and kindness, not birthrights or bank accounts. "This isn't over," he snarled. "Yes," Eli said quietly. "It is." He pulled Cora against his side. "You'll leave tonight. If you ever come near my wife again, if you so much as send a letter, I'll kill you. That's not a threat. It's a promise. And unlike you, I keep my promises." Something in Eli's eyes must have convinced him. Richard straightened his coat with shaking hands, trying to salvage some dignity. The mirror was her grandmother's, and you know it. Mrs. Henderson spoke up from the crowd. "I saw it myself when she showed it to me." "Has her grandmother's initials engraved on the back? E.M.L. for Emma May Lancaster. Cora told me the whole family history." It was a lie. Cora had never shown her the mirror, but others nodded agreement. Creating truth from loyalty. Defeated. Richard pushed through the crowd and out into the storm. They heard his horse's hoofbeats fade into the night, swallowed by thunder and rain. The saloon erupted in celebration. Men clapped Eli on the back, women hugged Cora. Drinks appeared as if by magic. Toasts were raised. Through it all, Cora clung to Eli's hand, overwhelmed by the show of support from people who months ago had looked at her with suspicion. "Thank you," she managed to say when the noise died down. "All of you. I can't." "Nothing to thank us for," Tom Miller said gruffly. "Your neighbor. That's what neighbors do." Later, as they prepared to leave, Steinberg approached. "The investigation into Thornton is real," he said quietly. "He won't dare pursue this further. Too much to lose back east." "How did you get here so fast?" Eli asked. "My telegram only went out yesterday." Steinberg smiled. "I was already in Cheyenne on business. Your message intrigued me. Men like Thornton. Well, let's say I have a particular dislike for those who prey on the vulnerable." They thanked him profusely, but he waved them off. "My fee's been covered by an anonymous benefactor who wishes you both well. Consider it a wedding gift." The ride home was quiet, the storm having blown itself out. Stars peeked through breaking clouds, and the air smelled clean and new. Cora leaned against Eli, feeling drained but free. Finally, truly free. "I can't believe they all stood up for me," she whispered. "I can." He kissed her temple. "You earned their respect, Cora, by being yourself, by working hard and caring about others. That's worth more than all Thornton's money." They were almost home when they saw it. A figure on the road, stumbling through the mud. Even in the darkness, Cora recognized the expensive coat. "It's Richard," she breathed. His horse must have thrown him. Eli slowed the wagon but didn't stop. They could hear Richard calling out, cursing, demanding help. For a moment, Cora felt a flicker of her old self, the woman who saved creatures others gave up on. Then she thought of all the pain he'd caused, the fear he'd brought to her new life. "Drive on," she said quietly. Eli glanced at her. Surprised. "You sure? He'll make it to town or he won't. Either way, he's not our problem anymore." They drove past without stopping, leaving Richard to find his own way in the darkness. It wasn't cruelty, Cora realized. It was justice. He'd have to walk in her shoes, quite literally, struggling through hostile territory with no one to help him. Back home, they fell into bed exhausted but unable to sleep. The adrenaline of the evening still coursed through their veins. "When you hit him," Cora said into the darkness, "I thought my heart would burst. I've wanted to do that since the moment he opened his mouth." Eli pulled her closer. "Nobody talks to my wife that way." "Your wife?" She smiled against his chest. "I like how that sounds. Get used to it. You're stuck with me now. Mrs. Morgan, for better or worse." "Definitely better," she murmured, raising her head to kiss him. "So much better." They made love with a desperate passion, celebrating their victory and each other afterward. As dawn crept through the windows, they lay entwined and made new plans. The ranch would survive, their marriage would thrive, and someday, God willing, the nursery would be filled with laughter instead of dust. "I love you," Cora whispered. "Thank you for fighting for me. Always," he promised. Always. Outside, the sun rose on a world washed clean by the storm. Richard Thornton was gone, limping back to his eastern life with his threats broken and his power shattered. And, in the little ranch house, two hearts beat as one, finally free to love without fear. The mail-order bride who'd arrived with nothing but shame and a cardboard suitcase had found something worth more than all the silver mirrors and social standing in the world. She'd found home, community, and a love that would face down any storm. And that, she thought as she drifted off to sleep in her husband's arms, was worth everything she'd suffered to get here. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in September, carried by a dust-covered rider who'd come all the way from Cheyenne. Cora was hanging laundry when she saw him approach, and something about the official-looking envelope he carried made her heart skip. These days, unexpected mail rarely brought good news. "Mrs. Morgan?" The rider tipped his hat. "Letter from Wellington and Associates. Ma'am, said it was important." She took it with trembling hands, waiting until he'd ridden off to tear it open. The legal language swam before her eyes, but certain phrases stood out. "Estate of Richard Thornton. Beneficiary. Substantial bequest." "Eli!" She ran toward the barn, letter clutched in her hand. "Eli, you need to see this." He emerged covered in hay dust, took one look at her face, and immediately grew concerned. "What's wrong?" "Richard is dead." The words came out breathless. "Killed in a fire in Boston 3 months ago. His lawyer says he left me something in his will." Eli took the letter, reading carefully. His expression grew more incredulous with each line. $20,000, and he's returning your grandmother's mirror? There's more. She pointed to the second page. A letter from Richard himself, written before he died. Together they read Richard's final words. "Cora, by the time you read this, I will be beyond earthly concerns. The fire that claims me tonight is of my own making. Fitting, perhaps, given the fires I set to cover my embezzlements. I write this not seeking forgiveness, which I do not deserve, but to make what amends I can. The money is yours by right. It includes what I stole from your family's modest accounts after spreading lies about you, plus interest. The mirror was always yours. I knew it even as I tried to use it against you. I came to Wyoming to destroy you, but found you had built something I never could, a real life, real love, real respect. In my rage, I couldn't see that you had already won. You escaped me, escaped what I tried to make you. That takes a courage I never possessed. Use the money well, build the life you deserve, and know that in my final moments, I envied not your husband's fists but his heart, the heart that saw your worth when I saw only property. May you find the peace I never could." R. Thornton. Cora sank onto a hay bale, overwhelmed. Eli sat beside her, equally stunned. $20,000, he murmured. We could buy the Henderson place, expand the herd, build a proper barn. Or we could leave, she said quietly. Start fresh somewhere without memories. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, is that what you want? She looked around at the patched barn they'd rebuilt together, the garden plot where she'd finally gotten some roses to grow, the mountains that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. No, she realized. This is home. This is where we became us. He kissed her then, right there in the barn with the letter crumpled between them. When they broke apart, his eyes were bright with possibility. Then we stay, and we build, and we make something so good, so solid, that our grandchildren will still be telling stories about it. The money changed everything and nothing. They bought more land, better stock, hired hands to help with the work. But they still rose with the sun, still worked side by side, still sat on the porch in the evenings watching the stars come out. The following spring brought the news Cora had both hoped for and feared. She was with child. Eli's reaction was everything she'd expected. Joy tangled with terror. Celebration shadowed by memory. We'll get the best doctor, he said, pacing their bedroom. From Denver. Hell, from San Francisco if we need to. And a midwife. 2 midwives. We'll... Eli. She caught his hands, stilled his frantic movement. Breathe. I can't lose you. The words came out raw. I can't go through that again. You won't. We won't. She placed his hand on her still flat belly. This baby is strong. I can feel it. And I'm strong too. You made sure of that. The pregnancy months passed in a blur of preparation and careful hope. True to his word. Eli brought in the best doctor money could buy. But more than that, he was there every moment, every fear, every joy. When she was sick in the mornings, he held her hair. When her back ached, he rubbed it without being asked. When the baby first moved, he spent hours with his hand on her belly, tears streaming down his face. Labor came on a crystal-clear August morning. Cora woke to the familiar tightening and knew, with a certainty that surprised her, that everything would be all right. It's time, she told Eli, who immediately went white. The doctor is already here. Remember, staying at the hotel in town. Send Jed. What followed was long and hard, but never once did she feel alone. Eli stayed beside her, letting her crush his hand, wiping her face, whispering encouragement and love. The doctor was competent and calm. Mrs. Henderson and 2 other neighbor women provided practice support, and when their daughter finally arrived, red-faced and squalling and perfect, the sound that broke from Eli was half sob, half laugh, wholly beautiful. She's here, he breathed, as if he couldn't quite believe it. She's here and you're here and... He couldn't finish, too overcome. Cora, exhausted but euphoric, watched him cradle their daughter with infinite tenderness. What should we call her? He was quiet for a moment, studying the tiny face. Emma, he said finally. After your grandmother. Emma Hope Morgan. Hope, Cora repeated, smiling through her tears. Perfect. They settled into parenthood with the same determination they'd brought to everything else. Emma thrived, growing round and rosy, with her mother's green eyes and her father's dark hair. The ranch prospered. Their circle of friends grew wider and deeper. And through it all, they never forgot where they'd started. A frightened woman in a barn. A broken man in an empty house, brought together by a whisper in the dark. Years later, they would build a grand new house on the hill overlooking the original homestead. But they kept the old cabin too, maintaining it carefully, unable to let go of the place where they'd found each other. Sometimes, on anniversary nights, they'd sleep there again, remembering. Do you ever regret it? Eli asked one such night. Emma finally asleep after much negotiation. Coming here, everything that happened, Cora considered, looking around the simple room where she'd first learned his name. First shared his table, first felt the stirring of love despite all odds. Never, she said firmly. "Every hard moment, every tear, every fear, it all led us here, and here is exactly where I want to be." He pulled her close, and they sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind sing through the grass, the same wind that had carried her whisper to him all those years ago. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, the usual chaos of a life fully lived. But tonight, they had this, each other, their daughter, their home. "I love you," he murmured against her hair. "My mail-order bride who slept in the barn." "I love you too," she whispered back. My rancher who couldn't forget a whisper. And in her crib, little Emma stirred and smiled in her sleep, as if she too knew the secret, that love could bloom anywhere, even in the harshest ground, if given courage enough to grow. The stars wheeled overhead. The coyotes sang their ancient songs, and in a cabin in Wyoming, a family that shouldn't have been possible slept peacefully, proof that sometimes the greatest loves begin with the smallest acts of hope. A whisper in the dark, a pile of wood by a door, a choice to stay when leaving would be easier. And in the morning, when the sun painted the mountains gold and the coffee bubbled on the stove, they would wake and live and love, building their tomorrow on the foundation of all their yesterdays. The mail-order bride and the broken rancher, healing each other one day at a time, forever and always, in the wild heart of Wyoming where they'd whispered their way home. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love, loss, and redemption in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're enjoying this tale. Are you listening during your commute, relaxing at home, or perhaps on a long drive? Please subscribe to From Wild West channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your stories and reflections make our community richer, and I can't wait to hear how Eli and Cora's journey touched your heart. Until next time, partners.